afternoon. Welcome to the Money Talks program. Please silence your cell phones and hold your questions till the end of the presentation. My name is Mac Wiest, and on behalf of the ANA and the Chicago Coin Club, I'd like to welcome you to the World's Fair of Money. Our next presenters are Q. David Bowers, Steve Hayden, Fred Holabird, Bill Hyder, Neil Mustane, David Schenkman, and Susan Trask. And let me go through the brief bios of each one of them. Q. David Bowers will be with us shortly. He's running a little late. He's the author of over 50 numismatic books and a contributor to hundreds more. He's a regular contributor to Coin World magazine and the Numismatist. He's a Hall of Fame member of the ANA, ANS, and Civil War Token Society. Steve Hayden, who is right here to my left, is a well-known cataloger and auctioneer of tokens and metals, recognized as an expert throughout the profession. Steve was a major contributor to the third edition of Civil War store cards and is co-author of the soon-to-be-released sixth edition of Civil War patriotic tokens. Fred Holabird, on my right, is proprietor of Holabird Western Americana Collections and has been a long contributor to the numismatic community. He has received the ANA Presidential Award in 2011 and has been a frequent contributor to Maynard Sudman Lecture Series at the ANA annual conventions. Presently president of the Token and Metal Society, he has worked tirelessly to expand the collecting interest in Western pioneer minor coinage and tokens that saloons and shopkeepers throughout the West use when small change was a scarce commodity. Some of his publications include Coins of the Comstock, the Pioneer Minor Coinage of Virginia City and the Comstock, and Gold at Pigeon Roost, the story of America's first gold mining script about America's first gold rush in Carolina and Georgia in the 1830s. Our next speaker is Bill Hyder, who's also to the right, began collecting coins 50 years ago. He celebrates the 50th anniversary of membership, 50th anniversary, no, 50th, I'm sorry, of the ANA this year. His interests are varied across U.S. and foreign coins, including ancients and Celtic coins, but his specialty is I get this word, Exonomia. I always want to say I call it Zunamia, but it's Exonomia. Bill has co-authored 2 books, one on Hitler medals with R.W. Colbert, and the other on Charbonneau so-called dollars with Jeff Shevlin. A second book with Jeff Shevlin is soon to be released. In addition to authoring and co-authoring numerous articles, he is the past president of the Token and Metal Society and shares editing and publishing duties with the TAMS Journal and Fred Holabird. Neil Mustane, who's on the far left over there, is a longtime collector and sometime dealer of tokens, metals, and rare books. He is the producer of the MCA Advisory, the Journal of Metal Collectors of America. He has written two numismatic books, the medallic work of John Adams Bolin, and a 2-volume set on the medals of George Washington titled Medallic Washington. He divides his time between Boston and Cape Cod. David Schenkman, to my left, in the middle, has been an ANA member since 1962. He has authored 9 books and hundreds of articles. He writes a monthly column for the Numismatist. He's a past president of Token and Metal Society and the Civil War Token Society, and is the past editor of both societies' publications. And lastly, Susan Trask is the president of the Civil War Token Society and editor of the newly published Civil War Patriotic Tokens 6th edition. I'd like to welcome you all and welcome to today's lecture, and I hope you enjoy this. Thank you.
So I think the first thing we're going to do, because I got a really pretty cool question. Some of these came through on the internet before with some data that I had put out on some of the publications asking for some questions. So one of the first ones, and I think this one's really pretty cool because I think everybody in the room really would like to know how these guys got started and why they have or have assumed the area of expertise that they have. So we're going to start with Bill and tell us how you got into what it is that you collect and why it is that.
It was 1960. I was 10 years old. My sister and I, a couple weeks with my grandmother in the summers on the Oregon coast, and she was always looking for something for us to do, and she had a giant jar of pennies. And we went in shopping in the town in Newport, Oregon, and she bought the Goodman penny folders for me, and I went through that jar, and that made me be a coin collector. And I went off to Germany as an exchange student. When I came back, I wrote an article that was published in the Numismatics as a junior about an Adolf Hitler medal, and I got a letter from a man by the name of R.W. Colbert in Georgia who was collecting Hitler medals. We became friends through the mail and wrote a book together, and that was really something down the line of being a numismatist. But a few years back, a dealer that I would always buy interesting things from asked me, I bought a token from him, and the next time I saw him, he had other tokens like that, and I wasn't interested in them. I bought something else, and he finally said, "What is it you collect?" And I just sat back and had to think for a minute, and I said, "Anything I can tell a story about." And that's really what drives my collecting, is if I see something that looks like there's a story to be told, that's of interest for me as a collector, and that's the fun of tokens and habits for me.
Your turn, Fred.
It was so dark. So what Bill didn't tell you is that he also was an educator, UC Santa Cruz, and that led him down another path that opened this numismatic field up wide open, and I'll just leave it at that. In my own case, I'm a mining geologist. I started as a little boy, like all the rest of you guys, or a little gal, interested in coins because my grandparents had little bags of these things that were handed down through the family through the years. I was interested in rocks since I was old enough to pick them up. I wanted to be a gold mining geologist since by the time I was at least 4. Grew up to be that, ran to open pit gold mines, 4 world-class cleanups, etc. Along the way, I became a student of the California Gold Rush and all things related to the California Gold Rush, how the monetary system worked, and it was all based on gold. It was completely different than the system you use today. And that system led people to contact me regarding the SS Central America when that was found. So I started a 20-year process on the SSCA. This is Bob and Dave and Dwight's new book, which is for sale today. They just got the shipment in. I encourage you to go by Larry and Ira Goldberg's table, but all 3 of them are there to sign it. It's wonderful. This is on the gold coin part. On the second recovery, my work was on the other artifacts, not the gold per se. So part of this early gold rush process involved money that was distributing in the West that was different than federal coinage. And first you had private gold coins, but you also had the use of foreign coins for pocket change because we didn't have any in the West. And then they started inventing these things called tokens. And those started getting used in the West. And then they started changing the way these tokens were used and made as different U.S. laws came into place, and they found ways around it so they could make more of their own private money. And through time, we had different mining camps after the gold rush with different related rushes for gold and silver throughout the West, and these mining camps were developed overnight, long before a bank could ever build a building in one of those towns, because it was a tent town, soon to become a wood building town, but never had the financial infrastructure. One thing led to another. Next thing you know, you own an auction company that sells more of the stuff than anybody in America.
Thank you. Steve Hayden.
Well, I also started when I was 10. We moved from one town to another, and I found a 1909 cent, a Lincoln, not an Indian, but when you're 10 years old, even in 1971, that seemed like a really old item. I'm guessing the prior owners may have been coin collectors and kind of dropped it as they packed their stuff up and moved it out. And so I showed it to my dad, and he took interest. Oh, this is very interesting. We should put it with the other old coins. What other gold coins? I didn't know we had old coins. So he had some silver dollars, some buffalo nickels, Indian cents, so a variety of things. And that got me started. And I collected coins for a number of years. And I was fortunate enough to be in a town that had what I call farm auctioneer who would do a coin auction every 2 months or so. And so I started doing that and did vest pocket dealing throughout high school and college. And somewhere along the line, they had a big bulk lot of Civil War tokens and other things, and I bought it. And I was aware of Civil War tokens before then, but just as some common Civil War token that was worth $2 or $3. But this had some unusual ones in it that I'd never seen before. Some of them were local to the area where I lived at the time. And I guess that was the bug. And all of a sudden coins were unimportant and boring and whatever. And when I got out of college, I started a part-time business and continued that until I decided I can do this full-time. Turned to that maybe 15 years ago or so and haven't looked back. Great fun. Lots of variety.
Got probably the best auction out there.
When I get around
when
to
he
it.
gets around to it.
That's my most frequent asked question at this show. When's your next auction?
And for me, it's when do I get your next ad? David Schenkman.
I started collecting in 1949. I was 2. My mother had a box of pennies, and by the way, I think they were way older than Bill Hyder's box of pennies. They were all Indian heads, and I was fascinated by this, so I started collecting coins, and by the time I went in the Navy, which was 1957, I was fairly advanced. I was collecting bust dollars by Bollinger varieties and various other somewhat esoteric things. I got out of the Navy in 1960, and I went to work part-time for a coin dealer, and one day he handed me a bottle of pennies, and he said, take them home and attribute them and get them ready for sale. So I did, and there was a handful of these unusual things. I knew weren't pennies, I didn't know what they were. So when I went back in, I asked him what they were, and he told me they were Civil War tokens. I thought, oh, that's unusual, and I was really interested in them. So he gave them to me, and so I started collecting, and I started, when I would go to the coin shops or the coin club meetings or shows, I would look for Civil War tokens. And I got to the point very quickly where I had about 200 Civil War tokens, and whatever I was seeing seemed to be mostly duplicates. So I assumed I had them all. I'm serious. And then somebody told me about these little black books that the fools had just come out with. And boy, they talk about a big bubble bursting when I got those books. But I found out that having books was really good, because now I knew which ones were good and which ones weren't. I became a coin dealer in 1961. That's when I took my first coin table, and I went eventually in the 70s, started doing it full time. I don't anymore, but I still deal. And I've been fascinated with tokens and obsolete paper money pretty much my whole adult life. And I've written a number of books on them, and I continue to have fun with them. The next 70 years, I hope will go as fast as it will.
Next, how many years is that?
70.
So, Susan,
Yeah.
I should add, I wasn't born until 2 years after David started playing.
Won't help you back.
I think that would be a question for his mother. Neil, son.
Well, I was actually 14 when I was born. But
When are you going to work?
I know. My story is not that much different. My dad gave me 2 little 8 o'clock coffee cans. One was red and one was black, and they were banks, but they were filled with old large cents, and they were in ratty condition, but I was fascinated. I had a paper route, and I would tell all my customers to pay me with change, and they did. And so I always had an opportunity to go through my change and fill up the Whitman book. And when I got to college, my Whitman books were all stolen out of my dorm room. And
Don't look at me.
So I stopped collecting for a while. I think I was more interested in girls, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, years later when I got married, I was telling my wife the story about how I had my coins stolen out of my dorm room. And she went and bought me a proof set from the local coin dealer. And all of a sudden it was just, you know, there I was going again, collecting date sets and mid sets, and I was, you know, putting together. But now I wanted everything to be top condition, you know, BU Unk, you know, I couldn't. And then I realized I can't afford all of that stuff. So anyway, one day I'm at a coin show and I was at a dealer's table and there was a token struck by John Adams' bowl, and it had an eagle on a shield. And it was beautiful. And on the back of the token was a list of names and the city, Springfield, Massachusetts. Well, I was in West Springfield and I was thinking, well, what is this all about? And the name Bolden seemed kind of familiar to me, but I couldn't quite place it. So anyway, I bought the token and I started to research it, and the next thing I know, I'm into collecting Bolden medals, and I got into myriad medals thanks to this man. And I used to just love to research all of it. I wanted to find out why was this metal made, and I would go to great lengths to track down the most minute detail about some things. So then I just started to write, and I guess that's it.
Can I say something?
If anybody in the room that hasn't read Neil's book on Bolden medals, do yourself a favor and buy that book. It's absolutely one of the best books written during his time, and even earlier. I really mean that. It's a wonderful book. He owes it all to me, but
That's true. That is true. I do all. You know, and actually, I would like to make a comment about that. Every guy sitting up here, I don't know Bill Hyder as well as I've gotten to know Steve and Dave and Fred and Dave Bowers, but any time you ask any of these guys a question, they will just drop everything and bend over backwards to help you. They're wonderful, and they've been great for the hobby and great for me, you know. So anyway, I'm done kissing you behind.
Don't be afraid to ask.
That's right. And so my story, I'm not one of the experts. I just get to hang out with these guys, which is funny. I did not start collecting at the early age of 4 or 5 or 10. I did not. My husband was a dealer, and we lived in Southern California, a little mountain community up in Lake Arrowhead, and he used to go down a couple times a week and do his coin runs for local coin shows and bid boards and what have you. And one day he said, "Come with me," and I said, "No, it's going to be 98 down. That's beautiful." He says, "Come on, we'll go to a movie and have sushi afterwards." Well, do most anything for sushi, so I went with him. We went into Riverside Coin and Stamp, and I went in with him because I wasn't going to sit outside in 97 degrees in the car. And just making small talk, I said to the proprietor of the business, I said, it just fascinates me that coin right there might have been in somebody's pocket during the Civil War. So, although I had no interest in coins, I did have great interest, and always have had in the Civil War. And I was looking at a large cent, and he said, not likely. The coinage of that period was hoarded. What you're looking for is a Civil War token. And my radar, my antenna goes up, right? I said, "Oh, can you show me one of those?" He says, "No, we don't have any, but we've got this little Whitman book here." And that was the start of it. It was the 4th revision. And the next thing I know, my husband joined the Civil War Token Society for me in Long Beach. And I met our good friends Steve Tannenbaum and Dale Cave, and they got me interested in it. And the rest is a 23-year history, and I'm still passionate about Civil War tokens and actually all medals. It just, the stories behind them seem to go so much deeper than just contemporary coins. So that's my very short life story, which is, like I said, I started 40 years after most of these guys, but that's okay. So our next question comes from Dennis Tucker, and I don't think Dennis is here. No. And I don't know who's going to be able to answer this, but here comes the question. And first of all, he says, this question will be on a lot of collectors' minds over the coming centennial year of the Manila Mint. Some say Morgan, some say Hewitt. The question is, who do you think designed the 1920s so-called Wilson dollar? Who wants to take that one?
I can, since it's the gentleman I work with, Jeff Shevlin, the Wilson Dollar is one of his favorites, and he wrote the story for it. It's an extended red book. The medal is signed in for Morgan, George Morgan, at least engraved the dies. And there was some discussion as to whether or not Hewitt designed it. And a couple of years ago at B&A, a friend came up and said he had 2 assay commission medals from the late 1800s. And was I interested in them? I took a look at them, and the reverse, one of them was almost a dead ringer for the Wilson Dollar, and the other one was the same thing, a Moneta and the Child and the minting machine, and those were designed by George Morgan. And so I'm very comfortable with saying that that medal was designed and engraved by George Morgan.
Super. Thank you. Okay, so the next question, this comes from Cole. Cole's in the room. Stand up for just a second. So, sit down. Yeah, I know it was, but it's going to get a lot nicer. So, this young man, I met him at A&A in Anaheim 3-4 years ago, and he was actually introduced via an email from a guy that does our PayPal accounts. And he said, you know, he's so enthusiastic, Susan, introduce yourself to him at A&A and make him feel welcome. He's one of our newest members as well. He's like one of our shining stars, just coming right up through the ranks. He was actually nominated to the Board of Governors for the Civil War Token Society 2 years ago. Far and away the youngest governor we've ever had. And I don't know where Cole started, but man, he has just hit the ground running. This guy knows, he's really putting it together. He's won numerous literary awards, and he's just so supportive of our society. And I know he's going to be the next Dave Bowers and just waiting for the stuff, because the articles he's putting out and the insight he has. But
Not to put any pressure on you.
Yeah, no, are you kidding? So I think this is really probably pretty pertinent for everybody up here, because most of you write. I think you all do. But he says, what advice would you give to an aspiring numismatic writer? How would you get started? And he actually says, how do you approach a numismatic topic that you plan on writing about, and what's your process? Dave. Oh,
Yeah, go with Dave
go Dave first.
You go ahead, then I'll tell them the truth.
So between Dave and I, among others up here, we've probably got, I don't know, 500 plus published articles, and I don't know how many books. So lots and lots. We probably each got started in different ways. I wrote a lot of professional stuff during my years as a geologist for work, so you hone your writing skills, and it's important to find a way to hone your writing skills. They are incredibly important, depending on what you do in life. Those skills you learn at the university, at the undergraduate and graduate level, become critically important. If for no other reason, then that's where you get your start to learn how to work with people who are editors, because you quickly find that what you think is perfection is far from it. Bill has great stories about that. So that gets things started, and then along the way, if your light bulb turns off upstairs and the imagination goes, then you want to learn what's wrong with this picture. That's how we think as scientists and engineers, what's wrong with this picture. But you don't have to be a scientist or an engineer to have the light bulb turn on and say, wow, how did this happen? What does this represent? And things that all these guys work on. I mean, Neil works on this incredible stuff with metals. Dave, you see every month in the Numismatist, among other places, with his fantastic columns on tokens. And he's clearly an outstanding writer, and also behind every outstanding writer are outstanding editors. You have the same thing, you know, Steve's got this incredible wide breadth of knowledge on Civil War tokens, hard time buildings, and some metals and stuff, probably as much or more than anybody today, and along with others of us on the panel. So we get approached to write articles, and you get those in publication, and if they're well received, then they want more. And the next thing you know, they're calling you, can you do something on this? Can you do something on this? I was fairly well published before I hit the trail on the Numismatic portal, so to speak, and then Coin World discovered me 20 years ago. And we published some really important stuff. I quit publishing stuff because the stuff I dealt with fakes. And I would publish technicalities of why it was fake, which the Americans in China quickly enveloped and learned how to get around it, so I quit completely. But it's all about the lust for knowledge, finding original source material that makes your stuff different from some other writer who's not using original source. If he's using tertiary books where somebody's already written it 10 times and 10 other people have written it, it's going to be of less interest to your audience. The original source material will be much more of interest, and those discoveries are really fun, and so on. But and I also want to encourage all writers to keep writing, submit your stuff, because we, as groups here, we've got the Metal Collectors of America, we've got the Civil War Collecting Society, we've got TAMS, and we've got the A&A represented in this room. All four entities need your papers, and we as editors can edit some of those papers and help make them better. So I think that's a good start before Dave gets to the truth.
Before Dave takes us over, I just want to say something real quickly. To anybody that's writing, and you write something and you look at it and think, I can't do this. There's a pretty famous writing coach, a woman by the name of Annie Lamont. She wrote a book called Bird by Bird. And it talks about how you write down your first draft and you walk away from it. Leave it alone. Don't try to make it perfect then. Come back to it the next day or 2 days later. And if you're missing a word or there's something that doesn't seem to resonate with you, and I know Dave Bowers does it because when he sends things to some of us to kind of look at, there's a bunch of Z's in spaces where he doesn't know what word to put in or what he's going to use. So allow it to be like a Polaroid picture. Like, remember the old Polaroid cameras that would come out and was really gray? And the longer you held it, the more it came into view. As you're writing, allow what's in your mind, but you can't really get the words on the paper. Allow it to come into view. Allow it to develop, so to speak. And then turn it over to an editor and let them fine tune it for you. Dave, it's your turn.
I've written over 200 columns for the Numismatics every month now, and one of the most annoying things in my life is the monthly email I get from them saying, and this will be maybe on the 11th of the month, your column is due on the 13th. It's really not a comfortable place to be if you don't have anything in mind. I have at any one time probably at least 50 articles of one sort or another, partially done, titles almost all done. I probably have 15 articles that are completely done that I haven't submitted to various magazines. But if whatever you collect, there's going to be a story somewhere. Almost everything you collect, there's going to be a story. So whatever you're interested in, that's your topic. And the internet is wonderful for research. And almost any time you want to learn something, you can write, whether it's 1,000 words, 1,500 words, or whatever, you'll probably be able to do it. So and I tend to, after I come up with a topic, I tend to just put stuff in the computer, a paragraph here, a paragraph there, and then I'll shuffle it and put it in whatever order I want it to be in. And there's so many resources out there. I subscribe to newspapers.com, which has, I don't know how many thousand newspapers going back to the early 1800s or maybe earlier, and I'm constantly coming up with things that will cause me to write an article. I remember a couple of years ago, one of the classic New York merchant tokens is a token from an omnibus line, New York. It has two donkeys or asses facing each other with the caption, "When will we three meet again?" And I decided to write a column on it. It was intriguing, it's an attractive token. So I started researching New York City directories, New York City newspapers. I could not find a word about this token. I couldn't find the guy's name anywhere. I think, well, he's got to be somewhere. So I said, well, maybe there's other cities. So I thought, I'll try Philadelphia. Not only did I find out that he was from Philadelphia, I found a newspaper article from 1837 that talked about these annoying cardboard tickets that the omnibus lines were using and how this man, Durkee, had come up with a metal token with 2 asses on it, and it described the token exactly. So not only did I find the attribution, but it's a hard times token. It was issued in 1837. So right away I had an article from just a research thought. There's all kinds of ways you can go about this, but my suggestion to anybody writing is, if you're interested in it, just start putting down your thoughts. Eric and I just recently finished an article on obsolete paper money that was it's listed in the Virginia book as location unknown, and I found the guy. He's in a little hole-in-the-wall town in Nuntown in Virginia, and from there we not only found out information about it, the notes from the 1830s, but we found, Eric researched the printer, and the printer, Edgar Allan Poe, worked for him. It was a publication in Richmond. So we had we're giving it to the Numismatics, but we had about a maybe 3,000 word article with some interesting, and the guy issued, his only denomination of note was 12.5 cents. And it would have the 12.5 cents on one side and 12.5 cents on the other, but there's 2 varieties. On one of them, there's 12.25 cents on one side and 12.5 on the other, obviously a printer error. And so we put it all together and we ended up with a nice article, which we hadn't really planned to do. I don't think we planned to do that much with it, but it morphed into that. So just start and feel free to ask questions of anybody that you know that has done this or might have information. You never know where you get information. I get emails from people all the time, and I send emails all the time.
I can add an anecdote about editing. Whenever I send an article to the Numismatics, when the issue comes out and I go back and read it, my first thought is, wow, I'm a really good writer. And then I sit down and I get out my original manuscript that I sent them and I see how they've edited it and I go, wow, I'm really happy for good editors. And the only time I was reading through an article and I came across this sentence that made no sense whatsoever. And I was just about to curse the editors until I got my manuscript out and they published my sentence exactly as I wrote it because they couldn't figure out how to edit it. So trust your editors and listen to them, and they're there to help you, and anybody can write when you got good editors behind you.
One last comment on editing. For those of you that are fans of Sam Clemens, Mark Twain, make sure in his autobiography you read the chapter on editing. Absolutely don't miss it. It is the most hysterical commentary on editing on the planet, and it tells you what a bad editor will do to great material. It can take something that makes everybody in the room laugh, everybody have fun, everybody be enjoying in the process, and turn it into something that's so boring you can't get past the 3rd sentence. So those are the kinds of things that make us happy.
As editor of the Civil War Token Society Journal, the one thing I would say is that we're always looking for content. And it doesn't make any difference whether you've written something before. Sometimes the thing that will inspire people the most is a brand new collector that just wants to tell their story about how they found something and how they really just felt compelled to write about it. So submit those things, even if they're just, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs. We're always looking for filler. We don't always just want to put pictures of panels in there. It's nice to have something to say. You were whispering down here. Were you saying something that I needed to know about?
No, we were talking about you, sister.
You usually are. And I have another question from Cole, and this seems pretty cool. It says, so what area of tokens and metals do you believe is underappreciated and is deserving of further research?
That's a big one.
Yeah, well, he lays awake at night thinking about stuff like that, let me tell you.
Who was first? Must be.
I'll take a stab at that. I think hard times tokens are not well written about and not well studied and not well understood.
I second the motion.
I would agree.
I think that would be an area ripe for revision and improvement.
I would agree with that.
Steve's over here.
I know.
Said like he's not sure.
I don't have many suggestions. I like political tokens, and there hasn't been a revision to that book, so I've kind of been rooting for Neil to tackle that, but I think he's on other projects. Oh, can we?
I think that the area that probably could use a lot of research is the area following the Civil War to the 20th century. there's two really interesting series of tokens, both of which have been cataloged. Hard rubber tokens, used for the most part from the Civil War to the late 1880s, and then shell cards, which mostly are late 1860s to late 1870s, with a couple of exceptions. But there are a lot of other tokens out there, merchant store cards, advertising tokens, and of course in the 1890s, aluminum, the late 1880s, when it became economically feasible to use aluminum. There's a host of opportunities for people to research and write in those areas. And one of the attractions of those areas is, unlike hard times tokens, which can get very pricey, these are generally moderately priced tokens, and you can have tokens that are extremely rare. And when I say rare, I usually refer to a token that's maybe less than 10 known, unlike Lincoln Cents, where SVDB is called rare. You can buy as many as you want. It's expensive, but it's not rare. So there's a lot of opportunity to own things that maybe nobody else owns, or maybe only one or two people own, without spending very much money. And it also lends itself to research.
And I just recently wrote an article on Montreville Dickinson's Continental Dollar that was in response to a question from Dave Bowers. Everybody knows it was issued for the 1876 Centennial Exposition, and he asked us, so do you have proof of that? And well, we pushed it back to, it was probably issued about 1861, but to not really talk about what that article is about. In trying to find that date and pushing back, the Numismatic portal is an excellent resource. And I went back and I read auction catalogs from 1850 to 1876 to find and narrow down the date of when this metal was first appeared in auctions. And in the process, I just thought about these old auction catalogs I was reading, the great collections and the fantastic U.S. coin collections they had, and what went with them were collections of early medals and store cards. And going back and looking at what these famous people that we revere today had in their collections really inspired me to approach collecting in that early period in a different kind of way, and gave me a good feeling for the respect they had for things today that are kind of secondary thoughts in coin collecting, and in fact have been important all the way through the history of coin collecting. And it's time to go back and start rediscovering some of that stuff and getting enthused about it again, because that's what they were doing 150 years ago.
150 years ago, they did not have the advantage of the internet.
You remember that, don't you?
It was a power issue. Power to drive there. Bandwidth.
So we're going to open it up for a couple questions from the floor. Does anybody hear any? Okay. Oh, are you going to ask that one?
I'm going to ask a question.
Okay, John Ostrander.
All right. This question comes from John Krailovich, so I'll shoot the messenger. For any of the panel members, can you comment on the use of cast planchets in the striking of metals and tokens versus rolled and cut planchets?
All right, I'll take it because that question was intended for me. Susan engineered this whole thing.
Me?
Hey, don't throw me under the bus.
In the research that I'm doing right now, I ran into something that surprised me a little bit. I mean, it's not something you think about a great deal when you're looking at metals. But I began to look very closely at the metals of this individual whose work I'm studying, and I realized that his planchets were cast planchets. And so it caused me to call John Krailovich one day to see if I could have a conversation with him about cast planchets. And he's, you know, John's a pretty smart guy, and he said that the use of cast planchets, I mean, he doesn't know for certain, but I mean, the use of cast planchets was probably fairly common in America outside the U.S. Mint and even within the U.S. investment, and it's probably not important to anybody here. Probably nobody here cares about that. I'm probably the only one who does, but I just think it's an interesting point. And when you're looking at metals, I'll give you a good example. For Washington, we would run into a cast planchet for the Manly metal. We would run into cast planchets for the Eccleston metal. And there are probably a number of other metals. And the reason is they're very large. So if you take a 3-inch metal in 1799, who had the machinery that could strike and bring up the relief on that metal? So when you're looking at metals like that, it's important to know a little bit about what kind of planchet they were struck on, so you can make a decision about whether it's a really struck metal or a cast metal, a fake. In other words, where somebody took and made a mold from a metal or the dyes and cast it. So in any event, and when you get into expensive metals, it becomes important that you be able to distinguish. So anyway, I've been thinking about it, looking at it, studying it. I have no definitive answers or explanations, but that's kind of why that question got asked.
So, and that's really important what Neil said, and from a science guy's position, you need to be able to tell the difference in the surfaces that you're looking at so that you understand the difference between a cast piece and a die struck piece, because to us it stands out like a sore thumb. But I'm going to bring up when this die cast, the cast planchet argument started coming up about 20 years ago. And people jumped on the bandwagon and started calling all kinds of metals and tokens cast when in fact they were clearly die struck. And so many people didn't understand the difference between them. And it led down a bunch of avenues that had to self-destruct and go away through time, as they did. But make no mistake, he's right. I think the original reason for having a cast was because the pieces are too big and the technology there not there to make a perfectly die struck piece. But at the same time, the cast pieces in my world are almost always a duplicate or a secondary piece, whether you want to call them a counterfeit, whether you want to call them a secondary piece. I'm not going to call them a second striking because it's not a second striking if the first one's die struck. And they're out there. And whether I use this example, piece metals, he used Washington metals as an example, piece metals and others, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's they're cast. They're from cast planchets, not die struck, and you can't miss it.
Well, let me add to that, Fred, if I may. Some of them are legitimate, honest metals. The planchets were cast before the metals were struck. And that's because they didn't have the technology or the machinery to roll a cold metal to get it to a uniform thickness and then cut it out with a die or a knife or whatever they would use. And so in the case that I'm working on...
Two parts to that equation, so what he's saying is really important.
In the case of C.C. Wright, for example, he struck some large metals in the 1830s and early 1840s. And if you just hold one in your hand and look at it, it looks beautiful, it's wonderful. But if you look at it closely, you can see the imperfections in the surfaces. And it led me to the conclusion that he was working with cast planchets because the machinery to roll and press and cut the planchet. And that includes gold, silver, copper, bronze, whatever your definition of bronze might be, and even white metal. So as opposed to a metal which is a cast, like some of the Getz metals are cast metals. So in any event, I just wanted to clarify that what I'm talking about is not necessarily a counterfeit metal. I'm talking about the use of cast planchets. In any event, it's important when you're looking at a metal to know what you're looking at.
So, well, I think that's the bottom line.
And bottom line is make sure that whoever, if you're looking to purchase something like this, make sure you're purchasing from somebody that's reputable and knows what they're doing.
And to test some of those ideas, I was dealing with some die trials of a metal that Barber engraved, and trying to understand that when they're doing a die, they put some etchings in the die, and then they carve, and then they do a test, and then finally the die is polished to get rid of all of those etching marks. And my question was, wouldn't those marks go away when you strike the planchet? And so, sitting with Dan Carr and his mate, we took a blank planchet, we made some incise lines in it, put it in the press, struck metal over it, and those incise lines were still there. So it really takes a lot of time and experience and looking at things over and over again to understand that whole minting process and what happens when a planchet is struck and what will remain and what won't remain in the process.
Yes.
I heard the name Carl Gertz, and I am a fan of Carl Gertz, and I do collect some of the Carl Gertz medals. And I would like to know, has anybody done any research into how many of those different medals were actually made? As I understand, and I could be wrong, as I understand, he lived in Lincoln, and they were hit with some bombs, and that destroyed most of the records. And I'll quit giving a speech, but I don't know much what I'm talking about. But does anybody have much about those statistics?
Dave, you look like you're getting ready to answer something here.
Well, I'm thinking.
Oh, I was going to say, your mouth is kind of moving.
So I do know the dies and hubs that were in the Bavarian Mint. Many of those survived. His son had some of those and did strikes from those original dies. Some of the casting plates survived, and he did things from them. But then there were also a series of new dies and hubs that were made. There's a gentleman, Scott Goodman, that bought all the records and the rights to the Keenax book on Carl Getz, and he ended up corresponding with the family. And so, for example, in his collection, he has the cabinet that was in Carl Getz's office that he displayed his medals in. He has his engraving tools and so forth. But there is a long story there about what's real and what's not real, and what happened with things over time. So some stuff was destroyed, but some things did survive. And there are ways to tell what's real and what's not real, but it's a process. And Scott Goodman is probably the expert today on that. And he does have a website, and I'm going to forget it right now. But if you go to the TAMS website, in the links section, there is a link to his site on Getz Metals.
You could probably ask him those questions direct.
Yeah, and he can educate you a lot about it.
And any other questions? Yes?
Are other professionals outside of numismatics, other researchers, historians, academics, and the like, are they engaging with the same kind of material that you all have engaged with, whether it's primary sources or the coins and metals and tokens themselves? And what collaborations between numismatics and other academic disciplines could be forged?
Well, Civil War relic collectors, a lot of what they collect kind of overlaps, at least historically, and you find a lot of that in the relic shows. So there are numismatic items that's a good place to find metals, and not just Civil War tokens, but metals also. Except they have a whole different set of standards. I remember when I published, I think this was in the early 80s, I published a book on Civil War sutler tokens. So there was a big Civil War relic show a couple of hours from me in Winchester, Virginia, I believe, and I decided to take a booth there and set up. And it was an education because I had my table there, and I had it full of mostly uncirculated Civil War tokens and sutler tokens, and then I had a big stack of my books. Well, the first thing, the guy that had the table next to me came in and he started dumping boxes of relics, and every time he dumped a box down, little dust things would come down and come down over the case. And I didn't sell any books all week and no tokens, and people would come by and look at, what's them? Well, they're Civil War tokens. They're Suffolk tokens. Yeah, but they ain't dug. These people were selling things like Suffolk tokens that were found on the battlefield that had holes corroded through them, and they were hot items. They didn't want things that were in nice condition because they might not have been battlefield used. So there's a whole different set of cultures out there, but people that are in that collecting field, they do overlap, at least research-wise.
Fred, being a mining geologist, probably has the perfect answer.
So your question is really important to people like me. And there's not a lot of, well, first off, scholarly research in numismatics comes from all different angles. You started to touch on some, the most important one, history. Okay? There's two different elements of history. So in numismatics, you see in the auction catalogs two things. You see a story about who the collectors are because they're concerned about provenance and how great these collectors were. And the second one you see is about the history of the coin and where it comes from, etc. And what you don't see very often is the science behind the coin, the science behind the genre, the science behind the whole thing. So there's a few of us working on this and have worked on it, in my own case, for decades, which it includes what we call metals fingerprinting down to the atomic level. And a lot of it's published, a lot of it, we give it some in lectures, some we give it others. I don't put a lot of it in print anymore because I don't want the enemy to use it. But it becomes really, really important. And when you get to work on great stuff like the SSCA or any other treasure, because I've been able to work on every single modern discovered treasure on U.S. grounds since it's happened. The scholarly research becomes exceptionally important, and the scientific study behind metals and metallurgy and how these things are made becomes exceptionally important, so that you're now going to see where some of the things that we did 20 years ago and have been improved over 20 years, now you're starting to see some of the folks that we all worked with recently and turn that light bulb that we talked about in their brains on, and now you're going to see studies published, the latest one in the Numismatic portal on the 1792 silver center cent. And I highly, highly recommend you look at that. And we're starting to see more advanced studies scientifically from our guys in the science fields looking at different levels of numismatics, because we see them not only how the coins were made, but it helps us understand when they were made, how they were made, and it helps us tell the difference between somebody who might have been trying to fool us in the 19th century and coming up with something that wasn't original, and now by using comparative analyses at a very high level, we can see it. At the same time, we can start to take things that were made 200 years ago and look at them on an atomic level and understand more about how they're made. And so on. And so there's a lot of stuff that's ongoing in this field that you don't know about because we've had a tendency in numismatics not to publish a lot about science and not to publish a lot about where we're going with different research papers. A. B, there's a whole other field that often doesn't come under the scope inside of the realm of this group, and there's another one from the A&S that involves a lot of archaeologists. That becomes really important. I'm going to tell you right front and center, European archaeologists on ancient coins are a light year ahead of modern folks. And in the U.S. sense, the archaeological field hasn't looked at numismatics too much. Maybe they don't think it's as exciting as the ancient stuff. Well, it is exciting. And just every bit as exciting, whether you're dealing with pre-colonial stuff, the very earliest of metallic pieces used in the United States before it was the U.S., or the stuff first made when it came out, or whether you're dealing with that funny thing we call tokens that were made later on because we had a lack of circulating currency, or these early metals that Neil's talking about, which is fabulous comments. These are the things. There are a lot of us that have studies ongoing in the science fields working on this stuff In my own case, I'm working on one that's absolutely outrageous, and it's where did the silver come from in the first silver coins used by the U.S., because the rumor mill is that Washington gave it to what's called the U.S. Mint system. Is it even true? You got to get down to the basics. So I love your question, and it's real important. And if there's young numismatists out here that are in college going into science fields, run it. Start learning. Talk to your professors. Talk to the guys that have been around the block. Run it. And if you're outside of that field and you're retired and you want to learn, likewise, run it. You can find a way. You know, where I live, we happen to be the center of mining in America, so the labs there specialize in precious metals. They specialize in everything to do with precious metals. So you've got people right there at the fingertips of your telephone that can answer questions for you. And it's fantastic. Just likewise, the metallurgical professor at your local university is only fingertips away from asking a question. The worst thing he can say is, I can't help you, sorry.
And just to touch on, Fred touched on archaeology. I'm an archaeologist and study prehistoric art, but coins are, in America, are rarely looked at. But there is a study that you'll never find because it's never been published. It wouldn't be published in the coin literature because it's not specifically about coins. It wouldn't be published in the archaeology literature because it is about coins. But it was a study done a few years back on the Custer battlefield. And one of the archaeologists just concentrated on the coin finds and what the coins that the soldiers were carrying and so forth. They did a social reconstruction of these guys and by the coins they were carrying and sort of what their life was like, etc. As they could see through coins. I've never seen a study like that before. I've heard a presentation on it, but you won't find it published anywhere. And hopefully someday that stuff will start making it into the numismatic literature because it's a completely different way of looking at our coinage and looking at people in particular situations and how they lived, etc.
Another question? Yes, in the back.
If one of you could address Indian peace medals, real, restrikes, and forgeries.
Indian peace bells?
Indian peace medals.
Methods,
well, I'll start. It's probably one of the biggest minefields in numismatics, especially when you get into the American engraved Indian peace medals. And the reason it's confusing is, let's just pretend for one moment that there are no forgeries, that there are no fakes, that we're only talking about real, authentic Indian peace medals that were presented to an Indian or a tribe member. So I'm authorized by the government to give these medals. We have them engraved. We present them to Red Jacket. We present them to whatever chief we're going to present them to. We know that the size of the medal is very important because that'll tell you how important the chief was who gets this medal. But the fur traders come along and they've got to deal with perhaps a lesser status individual, and they don't have access to the government medals that were issued, and they find somebody to engrave a medal to present to an Indian. Well, is it a legitimate Indian peace medal? Probably not, because it's not sanctioned by the government, but it was presented by a fur trader to an Indian, or a Native American, I suppose, or however you put it, to facilitate trade. So a lot of those pieces, I think, tend to be overlooked or disparaged. Whether they should be or not, I don't really know the answer. I think maybe they shouldn't be disparaged. So now it becomes important to go talk to Fred about science, because spectral analysis or whatever, determining the age or determining the engraving, that becomes important. But then there are a lot of fakes, a lot of phonies. And none of us are expert enough to know everything about what was done. You could show me an Indian peace medal and I might say, nah, that's a fake. And you could show it to Alan Weinberg and he might go, no, I think that's the real deal. And it's a minefield, it truly is. And I'm not helping you very much, but well, I'll just give you a good example. There's a very famous Indian peace medal called the John Jacob Astor Fur Trade Medal, and I've been reading about this and studying this one a lot lately. And, very few of them were struck, and they were semi-authorized by the federal government. So they're not officially authorized, but with a nod and a wink, the Secretary of War informed members of the American Fur Company that they could present these mementos or trinkets to the tribes that they were trading with. And so they did. But then a lot of people would make other trinkets to trade. And so the fur traders, I think, gummed up the works really, but our own federal government never had a consistent policy about it. And so the Astor medals, they're out there, they're found occasionally, somebody digs one. I don't know, it's just, I think you have to look, I think you have to go to a lot of museums and you have to look at a lot of known authentic pieces to really develop a feel for whether something is right or wrong. Getting into George III or George II or Carlos III or the Almerito medals, that's, again, it's all a minefield. There's a lot of very creative, talented people making really convincing looking stuff, and that's why scanning them, I think, having a metal scan, a spectral, what are they called, Fred? The spectral analysis?
Well, it depends on what you're doing, that's a whole other topic. If somebody brings it up, I'll answer that. But if I can continue on what Neil's saying, you're into it. I love his term minefield, and I've never heard anybody use that before, and so that's why your question back there is so appropriate. First off, these things are struck not one at a time, but in multiples, generally under each president. And some are actually given away to tribal members, some are given away with a hole drilled in it and a ribbon around the neck so that it can be worn. It's not always in the written historical record how it was presented. It's not always in the written historical record who it was presented to, but it usually is in the historical record when it was presented. And we know they made multiples. So the question is, on an Indian peace medal, is this really a medal that was given to an Indian in peace? Because if it is, that provenance alone, in my world, makes it utterly priceless. But most of those are gone. They're just flat gone. Why? Because we didn't honor our treaties, we get into all the social things to talk about. Next thing you know, Custer and his boys come in and decimate the tribe because they're ordered by Sheridan, no prisoners, everybody goes. So when that happens, these things disappear. And I'm going to use that example because he brought it up. But with Custer, and Custer got wiped out in 1876, but look at the other battles he was in, and look at the history through time of the great peace chief Black Kettle, and when Custer's crew killed him in 1868, and this guy was the absolute great negotiator of all the big Midwestern and Eastern tribes throughout America from the 1850s all the way until the time they killed him in 68. This guy would have had a treasure trove of peace medals. He negotiated with tribe after tribe, with Indian agency and federal agency after federal agency. And so where did all these medals go? They're gone, baby. They're gone. and they weren't part of the wagon of artifacts that Custer's guys took off the battlefield in 1868 at Washita. They weren't part of it. And so this is a minefield because we don't really know what was handed to these guys and what wasn't. And sometimes they're handed down in the tribes and they become sacred. And when they're handed down in the tribes, they're not allowed to sell them, and they're not allowed by culture to give them to an American government-owned museum. So they can only be in a Native American museum owned by Native Americans. That's custom today, and it's this minefield. So there's originals. They were so damn popular, they made restrikes right away, which you guys know. They were so doggone popular that they started to make them using cast planches, as Neil's talked about. And there's a couple of books on these that are pretty doggone good. But at the end of the day, all the issues I brought up become overwhelming and important.
And the last piece of that minefield is that I have seen pieces described as having been dug. And when they're described as having been dug, they were dug in an Indian cemetery. And that used
Right
to
there,
not
Jill,
make a
Neil's
difference. That used to not make a difference. That is not our culture today, and that is not consistent with federal law today.
Right,
So you can,
I'm sorry, Bill.
I was just saying, think about digging up your own, finding out your own great-grandfather's grave was dug up and somebody took an artifact out of it and now it's in collector's hands. That's the way they should be viewed today, because the Native American is the same kind of person as you and I, and their ancestors deserve the same respect that our ancestors deserve.
I got excited because a dealer friend of mine once had the FBI drive up their driveway and come and question them about a collector, and was curious about certain transactions between this dealer and the collector. And of course, the transactions that my friend was involved in were completely legitimate. There was nothing funny, but what they were investigating was a guy who was digging Indian graves. And
illegal.
And which is totally illegal. And but anyway,
There were some pretty extremes here to collect things, don't we? Yes.
I had a quick question. The St. Louis Arch in St. Louis, they have a museum underneath it that has quite a collection of piece metals. Does anybody know if those were assembled one at a time, or they came from a collection, or are you familiar with that at all? It's been a number of years since I've been there.
I heard him say St. Louis, but I didn't hear under the arch.
Yeah, there's a museum.
No, I'm not aware of it. No.
Any more questions? Oh, yes.
So one of the topics that keeps coming up is how we get more people interested in tokens and metals and ex-museum generally. And just reflecting on your introductions about how you all got involved, and thinking about how I and probably many friends here got involved, it seems like a theme is started as a young kid, with very few exceptions. Another theme is started as a coin collector and saw the light. And I'm sure there are other ways, but if you could reflect a little bit in a way that would be a little bit more proactive than you happen to walk into a dealer shop and got enthralled by a particular support token, in a way that we could act on leaving this meeting, that would be great.
Wish Dave Bowers were here right now, because he tells a great story about getting people involved in tokens and metals. He really should be here. But to kind of encapsulate one of the things he says is that when you think about putting together a collection of tokens and metals, it's virtually impossible. The price involved in investing in tokens and metals, and therein leading into the research that you can do, the story behind every token, every metal, is what we need to be presenting to the public. It's how many Civil War tokens can you buy for $1,000 versus what you're going to spend for, a Morgan CC?
Yeah, and then education, articles in non-numismatic publications, get them going. They've got different games they play with youth at the big coin shows, including this one, where you go around the room and try to identify different things. There's just a lot of different ways and having fun with it. So for instance, these guys are publishing one of Dave's deals about tokens good for a tune. And there might be a musician up at the panel up here who might play the banjo. And there's a token on there about a banjo token. And how cool is that? I mean, because they're good for all kinds of stuff. And by the way, another topic Dave could talk about for Dave, he collects reverses. Good for what? He's probably got 1,000+ different tokens with different reverses. Good for everything, from different kinds of tunes played with a banjo to a piano to some goofball amount like 7 1/3 cents. What's that all about? What a great research topic. And it goes on from there.
Yeah, and the thing about it, you talked about $1,000 for collecting. Unfortunately for us, when we grew up, we didn't have video games. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be collecting tokens. But there are a lot of areas. Civil War tokens is not one of them, really, because past the point, it becomes expensive. And the average kid doesn't have that kind of money, but there are lots of other types of tokens that are very inexpensive. As an example, Dave Bowers is doing a book on tune tokens, and these were tokens that were used in Nickelodeon's Drop a Nickel in the Slot that plays a tune. They're usually about the size, about 21 millimeters, and they'll say good for 1 tune or good for 5 cents in the jukebox, whatever they say. And there's hundreds of these things from all over the country. Mentioning the one for a banjo, there's 3 or 4 different ones for banjos. Dave doesn't own them all. He would love to own them all. And by the way, Dave could afford to buy them all. Because realistically, they're probably worth $100, $150 at most. Where do you find them? You can't find them because they're legitimately rare. So I said it before, there's a big distinction between rarity and value. These are not especially valuable, they're especially rare. So that's the curse, and that's also part of the fun, because if you can find them easily, maybe you lose interest in them. So you can still find stuff, and if you know what you're looking for. I was at a coin show a week ago, right before I came up here for ANA in Annandale, Virginia, and a fellow had a aluminum token good for 1 foot passenger over the Ohio River Bridge. Now this is a token that I've looked for 40 years. I would have been happy to pay $500 for it. It was priced $10 because the dealer didn't know. I find this all the time. So knowledge is great. Buy books, read them a 3rd time, especially buy my books.
Do you own that $10 token now?
I do.
For $10?
Oh, do I what?
Did you buy it for $10?
I did.
Okay.
I'm facing this with just my own grandkids because I wanted to get my children interested. My son had no interest. My youngest daughter had no interest. My middle daughter, she said, I'd like to try coin collecting. So the penny books, I still had those, and I gave them to her. And about 2 months later, she said, I've been looking at the prices, and I want to be a mother. And so now, so I'm looking at my grandkids and what can I do to help get them interested in. And my grandson from my son is a fireman. He won a Medal of Honor for valor as a fireman in Idaho, and that kicked it off. So I started collecting pre-1900 fire-related medals. And I'm building a collection that as a young boy, my grandson would never be able to afford them, but I'm hopeful that when she gets around 10, 11 years old, that I can sit down with that, and because of the fact that his father is a fireman, that I can spark an interest. And then that will become his, and something that can get him started. And as he grows, then he could add to it. So it's trying to find the ends that captures their imagination. And sometimes it'll work, and sometimes it won't. Lesher Dollars and I went to the second ANA seminar, and William Henderson talked about his Lesson collection. His grandson has that collection now and is continuing to expand it. And I talked to him and he said, my dad wasn't interested, but I was. And my grandpa got me going and he gave me this fantastic collection and now I'm continuing on. So it's looking for those hooks. I haven't found a magic hook yet, but I keep trying.
Can I just grab something? Because I've become joined MCA, CAMs, Civil War Token Society tables downstairs, we all participate in trivia. And there have been dozens and dozens of children going to that table. When they leave that table, they have a tax token, they have a wooden nickel, and I spend time with them. The questions there, because the circle is the question about the Libertas Americana medal. So I talk to them about the medal, and we talk about Benjamin Franklin, we talk about Sutler tokens, or what a Sutler was, and all this kind of stuff. So, and the kids are really interested, and you like to give and take, and you have to answer questions, and they leave with something tangible.
I think the important thing.
I think that's important. I've done the same thing. My son was in the 4th grade. They had the, well, what does your parents do? So I didn't go down with a career. I went down as a coin collector, as a medal collector, and all that. Originally, I was allotted 20 minutes. Well, after about an hour, the teacher says, okay, I think we have to wrap it up now. The kids were fascinated. I brought down items again, simple cheap things, some token, Indian head pennies, but that's it. They have to make an effort to interact with them.
And what you're saying is that it's incumbent on everybody in the room here to find what Bill was referring to as the hook. I mean, Numismatics is, as a rule, is dwindling. You know that the memberships are down. And how are we gonna bring that in? Tokens and medals are a great way because again, it's a lesser expensive way to start collections. There's a story behind every one of them. There are better stories. And take that extra hour or half hour where you might be watching a child play a video game and say, let's talk about this.
So the rock and mineral field does the same thing. They literally bus the students in by the hundreds at the national show in Tucson every year in February. They bus them in, hundreds or thousands, and they've got rocks for all the kids that they can learn about. Again, they go away with something tangible, they ask questions, they go around the room, they talk to different people, and it becomes wonderful. And that's why I love the stuff you guys are doing, because you're getting them all involved with this interactivity, and we need to. And yeah, you got to find stuff like Indian cents and tokens. Give them away. Get them excited. What's a tax token? Dad pays tax every time he goes to the store. Well, you used to have to use his doggone tokens. It goes on from there.
So all of us here that are collectors, you undoubtedly have friends that will come to you with a box of stuff and say, what is this worth? And I had a friend bring a box of stuff. It was Liberty nickels and Indian head pins. They were all good, very good, maybe fine, and some of them were full days, but none of the keys. And I said, go buy the Whitman albums, fill in the holes, and give it to one of your grandchildren that you can get interested in, rather than looking to sell it for $10. Because that's not a lot of money to people, but to put together a gift to a grandchild from what they have. And so each of you have an opportunity to do something like that when somebody comes to you with something that you can see, oh, this is an opportunity to help them help a child get an interest in something.
And before we get to the end of this, because we will get to the end and I will forget to do this, and it really is important, and it's another way to use this hook. This panel up here, all of us belong to various clubs. TAMS had their banquet last night. It was a heck of a lot of fun. Fred was the auctioneer. We raised, what, $1,100?
A lot of money. More than that.
So buying a membership per child and letting them get the journals that come, having them, ask them about the articles that they're reading in there. TAM's membership is, how much is it a year? $30 a year. Civil War Token Society is $18. I mean, this is an investment that just might tip the scales. Right after this meeting, the Civil War Token Society is having its annual meeting, and we're going to have a drawing for 10 of Dave Bauer's engraver's books that he just came out with about 3 or 4 months ago. So So if anybody's interested, you can join us in room 23, and we will have membership applications. And if we don't have applications, our secretary is sitting back there, and John Ostendorf would happily take your $18 and get you signed up.
Susan?
Yes.
Cam's is $12 for junior member, and if they join in the next year, they can get a free book. So we have some applications here if you think.
Yeah, the MCA is free for junior members.
John, what is ours? Is our not $9?
$9 for junior members.
So, and we will send them a free book too. Anything you can do, I can do better.
We had to hear this all last week. I want to add one last thing to the Indian thing, because there's one last point that everybody forgets about. That guy named Cat that wrote that spectacular work in the 19th century, 50% of the stuff in his illustrations he took home with him. He went to Europe, and that includes peace medals. So there's a batch of stuff that Catlin collected that's never made it into the collecting community today. It's only just now starting to get dispersed out of Europe. So there will be some legitimate stuff that will show up.
Okay, I'm done talking about why you all need to join clubs and buy memberships for all of your friends, neighbors, grandchildren, and children. We're trying to build memberships. Any other questions? Anybody on the panel have anything you want to talk about?
Somebody want to talk about science for just 1 second?
Who, you?
It can be misused for history people and the science people. If the history people are trying to put science in a paper and they don't understand exactly what they're dealing with, it can be misused. And if they don't understand the machinery or the equipment they're using, it can be misused. And you can have a piece of equipment that's calibrated to measure something like this, and you're trying to measure things in this, and it's not the same. And it's too often confused. So in my office, they have these little funny sayings I won't go into, but every now and then you hear things hit the wall behind me, or you hear papers are fluttering like this because I get to the second paragraph and this guy's premise is so bad and his data is so bad I can't read the rest of the paper. Can't do it. And but his history could be fabulous. So you have to be careful how it's used.
One of the questions that I get emailed to me most often, mostly as a result of my column, is how do you tell what tokens are worth? Now, we're not talking about the well-defined series, and the short answer is that's a question that's so hard to answer because the short answer is you can't. And the reason is these things, I have in my basement, my garage, a tomato crate, which is about a box about so big, full, you've seen that, haven't you? Full of tokens from a large cannery on the Eastern Shore, and they have locations at various places. There's probably 8,000 of these tokens in there, which makes it so ridiculously common. I've given away to YNs, I've given away hundreds of them. I'll never give them all away because I won't live that long. Thank you. But each one of those tokens in that tomato crate is many, many times rarer than a 1909 SVDB penny. And that is part of the problem. With this token, it's very easy. It's not worth anything, or it's worth $1 or whatever you want to call it. But when I wrote one of the books I wrote a few years ago, I actually went into the question of how do you tell what something's worth, and the reason I said you can't, I started tracking, and this was Virginia trade tokens, which are mostly post-Civil War, and there's the book catalog's got 6,000 of them, and I started tracking sales on eBay, because that's the easy way to track. And I never look at the high price, really, because it's immaterial, and that's where I think people make their mistake. You look at the second high bidder and the third high bidder, because in eBay, as you know, bids are legitimately reduced. So here's the example, typical example. Let's just say the token sells for $400. Well, you look at the next two bidders. The second bidder had to have bid just under $400, maybe $395 or whatever the increment is at that point. The second bidder might have stopped bidding at $75. The third bidder. So there's a very small market, but what is it worth? Well, if one person was willing to pay $400 for it. But let's say another one comes up 6 months later. Now the guy that bid $400 is out of the market. So the second high bidder bids his $395 or whatever he bids, but the third bidder bids his $75 or whatever he bids. So that second bidder is going to get it for $80. So is it worth $80? Is it worth $400? And some of the results that I came up with were a lot more extreme than that. And so my advice to anybody that's collecting, don't overworry about it. Buy what you like. Try not to overpay, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a lot of difference because A, you can't take it with you, and B, time generally takes care of it money-wise. I've always done well with collections that I've formed over the years, and I never was really concerned about whether I overpaid a little for something or not, because it kind of balances out. You probably have some thoughts on that also.
Well, I deal in Civil War tokens, which tend to be more common than...
well, that's true.
So there's more price records, but I agree, even on those. My, I guess, suggestion, aside from going to my website and you can look at old auction records, WorthPoint is one that I use, which you can look at old eBay auction records. So if you put in a token, and it can be a Virginia token, a particular merchant, you'll get maybe 10 hits for that over 8-year period, and you knock out a couple high ones and a couple low ones, and then maybe take an average of the middle, and that's probably roughly what it's worth, but it all depends on how much you want, and knowing that you may have to wait a couple of years for your next opportunity, so if you decide it's worth
40 years.
Well, it could be a long time. Those probably aren't going to show up on your search, though.
If anybody has an common walk, let me know.
Well, but and the other thing is that, well, Civil War tokens are very grade sensitive. And part of the reason for that is a good percentage of those tokens were struck for collectors. So uncirculated is the common grade. And there's a big, and hard times tokens, there can be a big spread in prices between VF and VM. In some series, it doesn't make any difference. One of my reasons for being attracted to Sutler tokens is there was a few exceptions. They weren't struck for collectors, so you can't get them uncirculated. And so it becomes less of an issue. Transportation token collectors. If you priced the same token, a rare token, in XF and fine, the person's gonna, if they're priced the same, it doesn't really make any difference. They're gonna sell for about the same price. And trade tokens, doesn't make any difference. People don't even want them circulated necessarily. They just want a presentable example.
There's a stigma that might be a hoard. It's a hybrid.
Right.
That's true. That's true.
Some of those are in my garage.
In a tomato box. Anybody else, any comments? Any other questions?
Actually, hard rubber tokens, someone mentioned, I think it was, are there any books, has anybody, I know the Civil War Token Society, in the back, I think there's a section on the store card, but is there any other books on them?
I wrote a book on them.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. If you, I might have a few copies left. When I moved, I gave most of my inventory of books to Wizard. But I might have a few. If you give me your address, I'll send you a copy if I have one.
I'll tell you, his address is in the journal right next to yours. I'll tell you a funny story about hard rubber tokens. I don't know, since Dave Bowers isn't here to speak.
I have a question. Can I ask?
No, you've got to go out there to ask.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I want to ask them a question.
Well, let me finish this thing about hard rubber. I just want to tell us about hard rubber tokens. This is pretty funny. Because Steve remembers very well how hard we fought to keep hard rubber tokens in store card 3. And Dave used to say, he'd call me, I'd get a call from him on the phone. John Ostendorf remembers this. And he'd say, I'll buy you an ice cream cone if you can convince John Ostendorf to leave the hard rubber tokens out of the... And John would call me back and say, Susan, talk to him. What are you going to do with Dave?
Let me say something also about hard rubber tokens. There's a lot more, and I've written a few articles that I haven't sent to Susan for the Civil War Journal on hard rubber tokens. And I think there's 3 articles that are related to hard rubber tokens, and each one of those I believe there's one token that's listed in the hard rubber book that probably isn't, and another one similar to it that isn't listed that is. They're a lot harder to date because they're not like Civil War tokens, which most of them have dates, not all of them, but they have a style. These things generally, with some exceptions, are not dated, and so, you know, if the merchant was considerate enough to go into business in 1861 and die in 1864, God bless him. You know, you've got a great attribution, but other than that, there's a lot of gray area in there, and that's part of the fun of the research. And research keeps going on.
Neil, you had a question for the audience.
Yeah, I don't mean to be, but most of us belong to multiple numismatic organizations. And I just have a general question. When you receive a publication from one of the organizations to which you belong, how long does it sit on the corner of your desk before you pick it up and look at it or read it? I'm just curious. I mean,
20 minutes.
Do people, well, you're professional.
Yeah, he wants to read his articles.
Yes. So I'm just curious, do they sit a long time, or do you wait several months before you pick them up, or do you devour them the minute they come in? I'm just curious. Yes.
I just retired in September, so the timeline that you're describing shrunk. It used to be a month or so before I get around to doing it. Now it comes in, I can open it up and read it immediately. Just before coming here, I went to my mailbox, I got like 3 different publications that you're describing, and I read them on the plane coming here to the convention.
Who would be more apt to read them if they were online rather than? I love that, yay. Got any more questions for the audience?
No, it's just that when you're editing or putting together a journal, where I think we're all really curious if we're actually reaching our audience on a timely basis, and I suspect we're not, because my own experience is that I get a publication, I'll get 3 or 4 months before I sit down and go through them, do you know what I mean? And I mean, shame on me, but I suspect I'm not that different from everybody else.
Can I?
Yes.
This is maybe a little unfair, because you and I talked about this at dinner the other night, but I'll offer for the rest of the panel the thought that the more generally interesting the articles, it's not really a matter of how quickly do I get to it, 10 minutes after it shows up in my mailbox versus, 2 weeks or 4 weeks later, but rather how likely am I to really read an article. And I'll give you my perspective, which is the more technical it is, the more useful it may be for generations of collectors for the next 200 years, but the much less interested I am in actually reading it. Whereas the more things that, even if I don't collect the particular item, it's still very interesting for me to read, the more valuable that is to me. And it's more interesting if there's a variety of things, an eclectic mix of things, as opposed to, all about a specific type of metal or all about a specific type of metal.
I think we can get a little too academic in some of the articles that get published.
I mean, I wouldn't go all the way to, sometimes you read these articles that are just redigested Wikipedia entries, and I don't mean to say that, but things that weave in, the numismatics and other parts of life.
That gets down to what we talked about earlier. Are you using original research in your article, A, and B, how good is your editor? Because, Bill and I have taken, we have one piece that we talked about in particular where the submission was, the information was fantastic. The stories were fantastic. The article itself was garbage beyond garbage. It was unreadable. And so we had to make it readable. Not only did we make it readable, we got an award for it by the time we were done with it. But you're right, and it's up to the writer to bring that stuff in, to recognize who's your audience when you guys are writing. Who's your audience? You got to think about it. Because if you're writing a scientific paper, but you're trying to present it to numismatists, that's a whole different deal. You got to scale it back, you got to scale it down in a way that can be read, and not only read, but let them have fun while they're reading. And that's what you're talking about. It's got to be varied. You've got to bring in all this other stuff that will bring in areas that they know about that make it more fun for the reader. Therefore, your digestion will be better, and the readability of the article is better.
I think that's a really good point, and I know that what occurred to me while he was saying this is I'm in the music business also, and
Let me ask, well, you don't let the cat out of the bag.
well, some people don't
Banjos.
consider that music, but parents so met at Juilliard, so I thought obviously, but I used to set up the trade shows, I would get a lot of CDs, and I would take them and listen to them all, and I realized that some of them really, really wonderful from a technical standpoint artists were boring to listen to. I never wanted to listen to them again. And on the other hand, some that were just maybe average, but they had a lot of personality. I found myself going back and listening to these a lot. I think there's a definite parallel in there. You can be technical as can be, but if it puts you to sleep, you're not apt to learn as much from it.
Speaking of which, somebody broke into his car yesterday while he was here at a seminar, and he was real scared when he got out there, but when he got there, they found they'd left another banjo in the back.
That is so old that I told that.
Okay, anything else before? Yes.
I think part of it goes back to what Fred was saying about writing good articles and how you write those. And if you write scientific articles, I can share Fred's background because I also am a geologist. We put together a report on a property. And you had no map, worthless. No illustrations, worthless. But I think the same applies to any good numismatic article. You have to have some eye candy.
Right,
absolutely. You have to be spaced out. You get white space. That's the editorial. But the author has to contribute has to be some images, maybe some close-ups, background, photo of the designer, and stuff like that. And it goes back to whether you're writing a scientific paper or a numismatic article. They all have the same basis.
Anybody else? Yes?
I'd just like to comment on this question. I usually have 1 to 3 or 4 months worth of journals and such, and I'll read them over time. Yeah, once in a while I'll get the first one, and then I'll look at the third one, and the fourth one, and so, something neat.
And with respect to John's comment, in order to do what John has described, you at least have to open it and look at the table of contents to see what's in it. That's what I'm kind of getting at, is that sometimes they come into my house and they go from the mailbox to the counter, from the counter to my desk, and it may be 3 or 4 months before I actually take them out of the envelope, or if they come in an envelope. So I was just...
Well, see, I never read the table of contents because, to be honest, all the topics here, I don't know anything about. So I rarely get an magazine as an article in my wheelhouse. But I'll read articles about like tokens and numismatic, and a lot of times they're very interesting. Unfortunately, sometimes when I get an article that I know a lot about, I go, yeah, this person's just phoning me different. So.
That it? Everybody's so quiet. Everybody awake? Well, we thank you for coming.